Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack some truly haunting, honestly incredibly atmospheric prophecies from the book of Isaiah. Specifically, we're looking at chapter 21, verses 11 through 17. We're actually going to be looking at these ancient texts through the eyes of a watchman, literally peering out into the dark, reporting on the shifting tides of empires and the fates of nations. It's an absolutely fascinating look into ancient geopolitics, military strategy, and of course, prophetic warnings.
Okay, so let's dive right into this with a literal cry from the dark. I want you to imagine the sheer desperation of people waiting for the dawn during a time of intense, unrelenting tribulation. This single, repeated question completely establishes the heavy, atmospheric tone of our entire text today. It perfectly captures the anxiety of those just desperately waiting for their suffering to end.
Looking at verse 11, we hear this desperate plea from a people trying to figure out exactly how far along they are in their night of tribulation. It's kind of like a sick person suffering through a terrible, sleepless night, constantly asking what time it is, you know? They are calling out to the prophet from Edom, basically asking, "Is our night of suffering almost over?"
Now, we really need to define these terms to truly grasp the scene here. Seir refers to the ancient land of Edom. But notice how the prophet actually alters the name Edom to Duma. By just slightly shifting that A sound to the end of the word, it becomes Duma, which literally means a deep, utter silence. It's symbolic of the land of the dead. The prophet is taking their very name and turning it into a chilling emblem of a future filled with death-like stillness, sleep, and just utter darkness.
So, the watchman's response in verse 12 is this incredibly jarring mix of hope and doom. He basically reports that, well, yes, the morning is coming, but unfortunately for those asking, the night is right on its heels.
And this brilliantly illustrates the geopolitical divide of the era. You see, the returning Israelites get to step into the morning of light and deliverance as they're freed from their Babylonian captivity. But Edom, their ancestral brother nation, is promised a terrifying, ongoing night of severe punishment.
To really understand why they're getting this endless night, we have to look back at a pretty bitter historical betrayal. The Edomites and Israelites were essentially brother nations, descended from Esau and Jacob. Yet, during the Jewish captivity in Babylon, the Edomites opportunistically invaded and completely occupied southern Judea. This massive betrayal of their own kin is exactly why the prophet's message of revenge is so absolute. The returning Jews would eventually repay this betrayal by completely expelling the Edomites and inflicting some really heavy punishment upon their land.
And if we track the history of Edom's conquerors, we see this endless night play out perfectly. Even when a brief glimmer of dawn appeared for Edom, like, say, their flash of power during the Herodian age, it was almost immediately swallowed up by another night. They were subjected to one conqueror after another. The Assyrian period of judgment was followed by the Chaldean, then the Persian, Grecian, and finally the Roman. Eventually, Edom became an utter Duma, completely disappearing from the history of nations, literally wiped off the map.
Yet, interestingly, the prophet doesn't completely close the door. He leaves this significant, albeit kind of ambiguous, hint in the phrase, return, come. The original Hebrew word here implies turning back or coming back converted. So this shows us that the only real way for them to escape this interminable night is through repentance. Until they change course, that endless night just hangs right over their future.
Refugees in the forest. The fall of Kedar. All right, the watchman's gaze now shifts from the heavy silence of Edom straight to the deserts of Arabia.
The prophecy pivots pretty hard here in verse 13, with a really stark warning. The burden upon Arabia signals this massive, impending disaster for the Dadanites, who are a people totally known for their bustling commerce and immense mobility.
Just imagine the shock of this. These traveling caravans were completely accustomed to safe passage and the legendary hospitality of Arabian tents. But suddenly they're overrun by a foreign enemy, and they're forced to completely abandon their normal routes. They end up hiding out like fugitives in these totally inaccessible forest thickets.
Now, verse 14 highlights the massive refugee crisis this created. It really captures how the local neighbors reacted to these desperate travelers who are literally fleeing for their lives without any provisions whatsoever for their own survival.
But right here, we see this incredible, powerful moment of humanitarian aid right in the middle of all the chaos. The inhabitants of Timah, who were descendants of Ishmael, really step up. They actively anticipate the needs of these thirsty, destitute Dedanites, bringing essential sustenance, basically bread and water, to those who are on the run.
Verse 15 reveals the truly terrifying reality of their situation. This wasn't just some casual relocation or migration, it was a frantic, desperate escape from active, brutal warfare.
These refugees were running for their lives from the drawn swords and bent bows of a massive invading force. According to the historical sources, this was the Assyrian army, highly likely during King Sennacherib's incredibly violent military campaign. As he marched into Judea, or maybe as he was returning from an Egyptian expedition, he just completely overran these Arabian clans, causing this mass displacement.
Now, unlike the kind of ambiguous Night of Edom we talked about earlier, God puts a strict, completely non-negotiable deadline on Arabia's fall right here in the text.
That timeline? Exactly 1 year. And this brilliantly illustrates just how certain this prophecy is. God sets this timeline according to the years of an hireling. Think of it exactly like a fixed contract between a laborer and his boss. The specific days and months are agreed upon in advance, and absolutely no addition or variation can be made to it. God's judgment is going to arrive strictly on schedule, no delays.
So you might be wondering, who exactly is Kedar? Well, Kedar was the second son of Ishmael, and this tribe represented immense military strength, huge numbers, and incredible wealth. Historically speaking, this is also the very same tribe that would later bring forth Muhammad. The prophecy declares that Kedar's wealth, their freedom, their military might, basically everything that made up their glory, would disappear entirely within that single, contracted year.
The prophecy then concludes with an absolutely devastating blow in verse 17, detailing a total and complete military collapse.
The text specifically points to the number of archers. Now, this isn't just a general census of the population, it's a very specific numbering of the fighting men. It's actually really similar to how some Native American tribes historically tracked their warriors. The prophecy guarantees a catastrophic decimation of these mighty men, which for sure ensures the complete collapse of their regional power and prestige.
So, as we leave the Watchtower today, we really have to ask ourselves how we react to this kind of impending darkness. Are we paying attention to the shifting times? Are we actively looking out for the morning dawn? Or are we simply ignoring the approaching night? It's a hugely powerful question, and it's left hanging right there in the deep silence of Duma. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep your eyes open to the world around you.